Here now, Fox News contributor, former senior counselor to President Trump, Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, it's been a little more than 24 hours. Sobriety among many of these people who have openly hated former President Trump. How do you see it?
They're very disappointed today, and I think some of the more honest people in the media and just in the political ecosystem overall, Dagan and Sean, are expressing that disappointment. So there was a lot of wishful thinking. There's so much we don't know. What's going to be in that indictment? Where are the smoking guns? And to have people like Andrew McCabe, to have people like John Bolton, Van Jones, even folks who ran unsuccessfully against Donald Trump, like Justin Amash, former congressman, or Jeb Bush. You had, before the indictment even came down, before we knew it was in it, Mitt Romney, Andrew Cuomo, all these unlikely bedfellows going to bat for Donald Trump. And now it's just gotten worse because it's 34 of the same, pretty much the same charge. Also, Bragg said something yesterday he's not going to be able to prove, and I know this firsthand. He basically insinuated that the other crime that Donald Trump may have been trying to cover up or commit was concealing information that could have hurt his ability to win the 2016 election. I promise you, as its campaign manager, I hadn't even heard of Stormy Daniels. I think she was mentioned in some article on November 4th about a different woman. After Access Hollywood, respectfully, 15 women came forward. Stormy Daniels wouldn't have made a difference. And certainly, she shouldn't have been paid. I think that was Michael Cohen said in 2018. He did it on his own without the Trump campaign and the Trump organization knowing. So people know this is weak. And the problem with it being weak is folks had, I think the best moment for everybody who hates Donald Trump and is afflicted by Trump derangement syndrome, for which there is no vaccine and no booster, was yesterday. Because here on out, if Donald Trump keeps beating back all of these challenges as he has for the last 7 years, then I think it weakens his opponents quite a bit. Last point, he's raised $10 million since the indictment less than a week ago, and he has gone up an average of 10% in the polling. The RCP poll has him leading his next opponent, Ron DeSantis, by 26 points. Every single Republican is going to be asked about Donald Trump. They're going to try to talk about their own policies, their own accomplishments, their own vision, and it's going to be Trump, 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 which is probably good for Trump.
So I want to drill into that because you're right. Donald Trump did get a bump out of this indictment and the arraignment. But what impact does that have a year, 8, 10 months from now when we get into primary season? And two, what does this do if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee? What does it do in the general election? Does this hurt him? You know Trump well. You were his campaign manager. You were a senior advisor. You know Trump better than anybody.
It's a great question, Sean. I don't think enough people have really level set and dug in enough down the road. If you peek around the corners, we don't know what we see. It may be that a critical mass of voters say, I just don't want the X factor, the uncertainty here. I just don't want all the hassle. There's just too much chaos and crisis already in this world, in this country. I love the guy. I wanted him back, but I just can't do it. On the other hand, you see so many voters who thought they were done with Donald Trump, saying, this is exactly what I want, a fighter, somebody who won't back down, somebody who, when challenged, pushes back in a way that makes me feel comfortable. This is the same guy who pushed back on Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, Mexico and Canada with trade agreements, and on and on. So, but we can't tell. And I do believe if you're asking Donald Trump to come back December 4th, the next time he'll need to be in New York physically, and then maybe hearings or trial is set for January. So that is in the middle of the primary calendar. They may be doing it so he misses debates. They may be demanding that they depose him at a time when he could have been rallying in Iowa. So there is complication here. There's no question. And I think anybody who says, and I know people do tell the president, because he has told me, people say, this is great for me, politically great for me. And I've been very honest with them. I'm like, nobody wants to be indicted. But I do think you've gotten a bump out of this because people see you as a victim and a survivor in part. Longer term, let's see. And let's see how the other Republican candidates handle this, Dagan and Sean. I don't think anybody has cracked that code yet. None of them have done a good enough job to say, I'm running hammer and tongue against Donald Trump. None of them really have gone out there and said, I'm not the alternative to Donald Trump. I'm the alternative to Joe Biden. That would have been their best message of all. I'm the alternative to Joe Biden. And yet, every 9 out of 10 questions they get are going to be about Donald Trump.
I came up with a good nickname for my home state governor, Glenn Youngkin, yesterday, the damp Dorito. but I digress. Kellyanne.
Oh, boy.
Questions are, you were talking about, I want to stay on, ask you about President Trump's speech last night. Questions have been raised about the potential conflicts of interest for the judge in this New York case, Juan Merchan, and his daughter, who's a partner in a consulting firm that's done work for several Democratic campaigns, like she's done work for Kamala Harris, Congressman Adam Schiff. The president brought the daughter up in the speech last night. Would that have been better left to surrogates, not the president himself?
Maybe, but this is a president whose own children have been dragged through the mud again and again over the last however many years. Everybody thinks it's okay to make fun of the way they all look and speak and what they do. And let me just say this. His daughter is 34 years old. She's, I guess, a seasoned professional at this point. You're not going to get a lot of sympathy from Kellyanne Conway, whose 15-year-old daughter was being contacted by members of the media, and I know everyone who did that. I just haven't revealed it all yet. There is time. But look, I think that President Trump's surrogates could have made that point, but I think he's laying the groundwork, too, to say, just say to his supporters, and frankly, other people who don't necessarily support him but think this is unfair and a miscarriage of justice. He's saying, I don't even think I can get a fair trial in Manhattan, a place where Joe Biden beat him by about 86-13. Mm-hmm. That's what, 6-1, 5-1, 6-1, almost 7-1, and also a place where Alvin Bragg, the DA who's brought this very thin legally case, more political than legal if you look at all the CNN and Quinnipiac polling, the independents think, Alvin Bragg promised. He won that office in part to do exactly what he did yesterday, which is get Donald Trump. Letitia James said the same thing. So I think Donald Trump has good claims to file legally, change of venue, unfair trial, maybe selective prosecution. Alvin Bragg has run his office in the opposite way that he treated Donald Trump. He is reducing felonies to misdemeanors. In this case, he's taking a misdemeanor and trying to layer things on top of it, bootstrap it, and make it a felony. And so we'll see where all that goes, but I think he's got every right to call into question people's biases. I got to tell you, I was just a staffer, and the way we were all treated by the same media clutching their pearls over a 34-year-old being told, somebody saying, look, she is a partisan. I think Alvin Bragg's kind of a proud partisan here. Why else would you run for DA on a platform of, I'm going to get one of the most famous residents of Washington, D.C., who, by the way, also happened to be the former president and perhaps future president?
You make a really good point. I mean, one, Alvin Bragg is a partisan. It appears this judge may be a partisan, and it'll be very difficult for Donald Trump to get a fair and impartial jury that wants to listen to the facts of the case. It does feel like the deck is stacked against him. But, Kellyanne, I want to move on because in Wisconsin, my home state, yesterday there was a big election. The Supreme Court is going to flip. The liberal candidate won. The conservative lost by more than 10 points. It was a huge victory for the progressives in Wisconsin. Also in Chicago, the progressive, the liberal, won over the, not a conservative, but a less progressive candidate in Chicago. What's happening here? I would think that these races would have trended towards a more conservative candidate, especially 5 days after we had the indictment of Donald Trump. And on the day he was arraigned, these elections were going on Tuesday. But here, progressives did really, really well. What's the messaging problem that Republicans are having?
Sure, Sean, I think it's an excellent question, especially on the heels of the November midterms, where Republicans did win the House, won some key races and in the Senate, but also came up short in many places that perhaps could have gone better. I think in part messaging, my message to Republicans is finish your sentences. And I've worked on these judicial elections before, not the one you're talking about in Wisconsin. Many people need to even start at the beginning and understand what is the judiciary does in its state that's different from the legislative branch and the executive branch, and why you should care. I tell people routinely, judges, the judiciary has more governance over your personal liberties and pocketbook issues often enough than that chief executive, governor, statewide offices, and of course the state legislature. But I think when you lose by 10 points, it's not just a money problem, it is a messaging problem. I think that many conservatives have not figured out how to message on Dobbs and Roe versus Wade yet. You hear it from many young people, young men and women. We were just in the field recently on a poll of 18 to 30-year-olds we're going to release soon. with another firm, John Brabender, and it is very clear that young people are focused on, among other things, abortion and climate change, not exclusively, and not more than economy and education, but much more than other age groups. And I believe that in Chicago, if you go from Lori Lightfoot, it was going to be a jump to go to Paul Vallis. So I think they went for somebody maybe not as controversial, but maybe just as liberal on some issues. But look, my message to Republicans is finish your sentences. Crime, inflation, education, economy, those are not sentences. Those are words. And also lead with solutions. Sean, Dagan, if you're leading with problems, you're already echoing what the voters are saying. They want you to start with specific solutions that they can understand. They're accessible, they are relatable, and they are doable. And then also, I think we're just saying, oh, it's not fair. The left is lying about us and scaring people about us. You know what? Push right back at them. Get right up in their grill. I think the facts are on our side. I just don't think the fear-mongering and all the lies that the left peddles to win these races are on our side. And we need, last point, we need to, this is not just a battle for votes. It's a battle for ballots. We need a better mechanism in place to suss out how to get people to vote earlier than they have been voting. This nonsense that Republicans are going to wait till Election Day to vote is complete nonsense. We need to make sure that we can bank that vote early. I don't like all the new voting systems in Wisconsin and elsewhere, Sean and Dagan, but if that's the new normal, we need to bank those votes earlier and earlier. Get ahead of that for 2024.
Republicans have to push back, they have to fight back. They can't take the punches and think they're going to win elections when you're demonized and say nothing in response. Kellyanne Conway, thanks for joining us. Always smart. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And